To those of you who voted for Donald Trump, congratulations are due. In a democratic society, we honor the will of the people, and tonight, the people have spoken. For those of us who voted for Kamala Harris, this is not simply a lost election. For millions, this result represents a collective state of trauma.
What's up, everybody? That was Marriane Williamson. I don't have a long show for you today, but I definitely want to show her reaction to Trump getting elected and why she believes that Trump not just won, but the Democrats lost themselves. They lost the plot. They lost it for themselves. I've heard many people saying this. Josh Fox, Daniel Pinchbeck. By the way, Daniel Pinchbeck also just posted something today that says, was the election hacked? Probably. Does anyone care? Question mark. It's interesting that these tropes and these themes comes up, and the left will use tactics that they hate when the right uses it, and vice versa. But I want to show you that not everybody is like the liberals that you see on social media, like this.
They don't deserve to teach a woman for the next 4 years. Hope you got that through, guys.
Do you really hate me that bad?
There are very sane liberals and people on the left that do not act or behave like that. But that is what we're given. And in the same vein, not every Republican or conservative-leaning voter is like this.
The latest poll shows that Trump's approval rating among African Americans is at 3%. Why do you think that is?
Fake news.
Well, Mississippi! Mississippi! Klansmen for America!
So what do we do when we're being told by social media that the left is like this and the right is like that? That is when the government is steering the people, not the other way around. This is not operating like a government of, for, and by the people. The founding fathers said, we have a country of the consent of the governed, right? Then it sounds like people said, well, how do we exploit that? Okay, well, you just manufacture consent. You frame the world with certain boogeymen and certain solutions and certain values and core principles that have very specific friction and interaction with a different constellation on the right, different values, many of the same ones, but let's not talk about those. Let's talk about where we conflict with one another. And then the machine, not just the left-right party machine, which is one singular organism that appears as two choices for the people, but also the social media and AI apparatus that is forcing, not just through algorithms, but through bots as well, a certain kind of world, a simulated world around us, to where we believe that's the world that we live in. And if you know anything about epigenetics, the environment you live in and stress can cause your genes to express differently. So if you can simulate a world for the left and for the right separately that have contention points, and you press on those contention points, here's what you do. You light up their amygdalas, respectively. But then they have different value structures that are built into the narratives and the messaging of both constellations that begin to rise up and want blood from each other because they scapegoat on one another. And scapegoating is the process of Satan, as brought up by Robert Breedlove on one of his last podcasts, What is Money podcast. And that scapegoating process is now held into a permanent part of a game. And it's not just game theory. It's the game of governance, whereby we want technology and society at large to make our lives a little bit more convenient while not giving up our liberties. That's what we want of the system. And so we love all the things that it does for us. Yeah, I don't want to go without AC. No, I don't want to go without being able to drive or travel or, eat food in many varieties with different flavors and different promises on each packaging from the grocery store. I don't want to give up any of that, but here's what I do want. I have a list of all these demands. Are you going to have gratitude for what you do have? No, I don't have time for that. I want to bitch about what I don't have. And that's how you end up with the world that we have today, where people cry and whine on TikTok. And I truly believe that some of those liberal crying videos are fake. They're people on the right or people that just are paid to make certain media to be able to use that media to paint the left in a certain way so the right cannot fucking understand their minds. And I believe that both the right and the left are pushing many of the same kinds of propaganda on their own people, consciously and subconsciously, in order to give rise to an amygdala-powered feud where you're not in your prefrontal cortex, you're in your mid and hindbrain, you're acting more emotionally and like an animal, and you're fighting with one another, and you don't even fully know why, because the higher sensibilities, not just of your brain, but of how we perceive the world and how we get on with what draws us towards certain kinds of behavior, it's hijacked and we don't see it because our amygdala is lighting up so much, and that's taking all of our attention. I want to get back to Marriane Williamson and what she had to say about the left losing this election for themselves.
The fears of authoritarianism among left-leaning Americans are very real and in many ways legitimate. We will need to mount a powerful, loyal opposition to any efforts by the president-elect and his administration to transgress the norms and rules of a democratic society. Democratic voters will need to grieve, but our time of grief should not be wasted. To lead to positive next steps, it must include a meaningful analysis of how this debacle could have happened. And we should not let those who led us to this place assume leadership of that analysis now. Acquiescence to the canned narratives of a few people who got us into this mess is not the way to get out of it. Slavishly accepting their version of events was the problem, and it would not be the solution. Make no mistake about it. Responsibility for Trump's victory lies squarely at the feet of those who took it upon themselves to cancel the Democratic presidential primary. They'll be working overtime over the next few days and weeks to promulgate convenient narratives that displace the blame onto anyone and anything other than themselves. But that is nothing but a cover-up, and no one should buy it. It was they who decided that Donald Trump posed such a threat to democracy that democracy needed to be canceled this year. For the last year and a half, we should have been having a robust conversation among ourselves regarding what it would take to defeat Donald Trump this year. That is what a primary is for. In a democracy, it's the voters, not party leaders and media elite, who are meant to choose the nominee. The appropriate role of a Democratic Party is to facilitate democracy, not engineer it.
What a line. The role of a government is to facilitate democracy, not manufacture it. To facilitate an environment whereby democracy flourishes in a way that cannot be captured by private interests for their own self-benefit. So, manufacturing consent is the way that you do that. And in order to get to the place where you think that's okay enough to do, where your conscience is clean enough to where you can sleep at night by doing that, the system has to produce sociopaths and psychopaths. That is actually the result of the type of human you have to be able to rise to the top and still sleep at night with some of the things you have to do in order to get there. So who do you blame for that? Do you blame people who are alive now? Well, they're not the ones who set the machine in motion. Do you blame people who built it? Let's say the founding fathers of America, or do we blame the people who are steering the vehicle now? Or is blame not the answer? Now, blame, in the way that Marriane Williamson is doing it, I think is important because you're diagnosing a hiccup in the natural, organic function of our democracy. But blame is a way of offsetting personal responsibility onto the exterior world in order to not feel responsible for what happened in the world. And that is the act of going into ego. That is the act of intentionally going unconscious from a certain kind of pain that we know we are intimately spiritually connected with all others. And so part of us is Trump. I'm sorry to say it. Part of us is Kamala. Part of us is Hitler and all those names that you hate. Part of us is all of it. And in the same breath, Before I let Marriane Williamson take it away with the rest of her speech, I just want to say that if you believe in God or that there is some intelligent creator to all of this, then all of the things you detest most about reality are because of God, that which you love the most. Try and reconcile that. And please listen to this beautiful soul, Marriane Williamson, speaking her heart in a very clear and direct manner about how we get back on track as a nation if you, in fact, are upset about what happened with the election. Here it is.
Its job is to stand back and let the voters decide who a nominee should be, and then step forward to support the people's choice. In this year's campaign, in an absurd perversion of the democratic process, the Democratic National Committee took it upon themselves to simply decide that Joe Biden would be the candidate, as they later simply decided to replace him with Kamala Harris at the head of the ticket. The outsized power of political parties has become the danger to democracy that both George Washington and John Adams warned that they might be. Their control of the process was exerted primarily through media and the internet. Narratives such as, "We don't primary incumbent presidents," are simply ridiculous. Many of us are old enough to remember that Senators Eugene McCarthy and Robert Kennedy Sr. primaried the sitting president, Lyndon Johnson. It was that which turned the fervor for ending the war in Vietnam into a decisive political factor that could no longer be ignored. Another such narrative was the notion that anyone running against Biden is a spoiler, totally contradicting the basics of a 7th grade civics class. You cannot be a spoiler if you're running in a primary. And it was said repeatedly, creating an almost trance-like state among Democratic voters, that no other credible or qualified candidates were running against the president. This was used to justify a de-amplification of any candidate who tried. First myself, then Bobby Kennedy Jr., then Dean Phillips were treated with various degrees of derision by these self-appointed protectors of our democratic project. What they really meant by credible was someone from their club, someone they chose. And what they meant by qualified was someone qualified to perpetuate the system that the American people made very clear tonight that they don't want. What we should have seen as qualified was someone able to foresee that this disaster was coming, should we look to the corporatized Democratic playbook in order to win this year. Someone not only who could explain why that was, but also present to the voters a reasonable and compelling agenda for exactly how to avoid this outcome. Instead, a relatively small group of people, men and women who apparently haven't strolled much outside their gated communities over the last few years to have even a clue as to what was really going on with the American people, assumed the position of deciders. Because Joe Biden had beaten Trump in 2020, this group of Democratic political and media elites assumed he had the best chance of beating him again. And they were certainly within their rights to hold that opinion. What was not within their rights, however, was to suppress any Democratic efforts at challenging that opinion. They assumed the authority, feeling entitled to do so, to basically choose the Democratic nominee this year, suppressing any genuine effort that might be posed by a primary challenger. We need more democracy, not less. And we need a major political party in this country dedicated unequivocally to the needs of the working people of the United States. That means, in too many cases, those who are hungry, those who are medically uninsured or underinsured, those who are drowning in medical debt, those who are without hope. On many issues, Donald Trump offers only false hope, but people will go with false hope before they'll go with no hope at all. From party bosses to media elites to progressive organizations that complied with party and donor demands so much that you would not even speak to me, to the unethical operatives who conspired in all of this. I hope you will feel the shock of this moment, just as the rest of us do. And for the sake of this country, I hope you will resign your imaginary leadership positions going forward, positions which existed nowhere except in your own minds, by the way, in forging a loyal Democratic opposition to our president-elect. To put it bluntly, at this point, we the people can better take this from here. The Democratic Party, if it is to survive as a major force in American politics, must become more genuinely democratic again. Their media partners should reject the journalistic malfeasance whereby they felt justified in de-amplifying candidates that they simply didn't like. Many people in the party need to look in the mirror now and not to messaging experts to help them spin this. It will be the purification of conscience and critical thinking on the part of all Americans that will lead us forward, better than ever, in fact, having left this unfortunate chapter behind us. The election is over. The days ahead are uncertain, but if we remain true to our hearts, dedicated to integrity, and committed to our country, then better times will still yet lie ahead. Thank you.